Contradict myself now. What?
Culture, it's typically a conversation
La
that
la
is
la.
met with a lot of resistance. And so, in this video, we're going to be discussing why some people say that Black Americans don't have culture. In defense of Black culture, you'll typically hear Black people say that, oh, well, we have fashion, we have music, we have food, and those elements are ultimately emblematic of Black culture. But critics would say that there is not a cultural adhesive that unites.
First off, let me sit there and just read what I said because I ate. This is very interesting to me because what is the cookout? What is the family reunion? What is the food you create from your past and so on? The shared experiences of being black is culture. The only reason they refuse to acknowledge that is because they had more time to solidify that. And that is what is annoying because they know what culture is, yet they refuse to respect ours. Period, bitch. Let's move on.
All Black people. And what would that cultural adhesive be that unites every single Black person? So I want you to think about that question for a moment, and then we're going to come back to it at the end of the video. Okay, so why do some people believe that music, fashion, and food do not really suffice as Black culture? Well, ultimately, you could say that that's because for some people, they believe that those would be considered cultural artifacts. So, what is an artifact? An artifact is an object made by a human being, typically of cultural or historical interest. So you would say things like tools, pottery, jewelry, coins that we like discover from ancient civilizations. Those would be cultural artifacts. You could ultimately say things like pyramids and the Mayan calendar and Dead Sea Scrolls. Those are also cultural artifacts made by people during those historical time periods. So, a little bit of history. Black people are descendants of a colonized people, and we as a collective throughout history have produced these cultural artifacts of music, fashion, and food to educate, entertain, and describe who we are as Black Americans. So, let me give you an analogy. Let's say that there's this museum, okay? And we have these cultural artifacts that are ultimately on display.
I'm listening to what he's saying. I just want to say that I do love how calm his voice is. Right? The cultural art. I like how calm it is. It's really soothing. Okay?
Produced by Black people. We have music, we have fashion, and we have, what else did I say? Food. Okay? So when Black people invite other races of people into the museum, right, that they are then expected to not touch these sacred artifacts that, Black people see as being emblematic of Black culture, right? But then within the museum, you start to see non Black folks that start to talk with the Black accent, use African American vernacular English, dress in more, have like more of a hood aesthetic or more of a hip hop, aesthetic. And what you'll ultimately hear people say is, oh, well, now we need to gatekeep our culture. And some critics will ultimately say that the need to have to gatekeep your culture is actually an indication that Black people don't have a culture, because you don't hear Latinos saying that they have to gatekeep their culture. You don't hear the Asians saying that they need to gatekeep their culture. But for some reason, you hear a lot of Black people say that our culture needs to be gatekept. Okay, so then why do people, so if we have music, if we have food, if we have culture, then why do people not believe that those elements, are not sufficient enough to say that we have culture? And I believe it's ultimately because what Black people are lacking is a cultural construct that is built into the people. that then is preserved over time. So, what constitutes a cultural construct? There are a couple of elements. It has to be built into a people. All people must all people must
Oh,
participate
oh, okay. Oopsie, wrong one. There we go.
or experience this cultural construct must pass through it. It cannot be replicated by any other people. And then, fourthly or lastly, it has a degree of intergenerationality. It has to be preserved and safeguarded by the people. So, some examples of cultural constructs, right? You would say that or within Latino culture, you have the Day of the Dead, right? Where everybody, you have the ofrenda and you have, everyone's eating pan de los muertos, things like that. That is a cultural construct that is built into a people that all people kind of experience, that all Latinos kind of experience, right? You also have the quinceañera, right? So that is an experience that is, traditional. It is something that young Latino women experience, and it ultimately instructs Latino men in a way to, it kind of informs them on how to then treat younger women, right? That's essentially the idea. Also, within Africa, you have things like the dowry system, right? Where, the man has to, ultimately appease parents. It's an experience that, all people have to ultimately go through, and it is a construct that is then taught to the very next generation and passed down to them. So, with that being said, because there is no cultural construct for Black people, we would say, some people would say that we don't have culture. Instead, what we are is a collective of Black people with the shared experience of being Black. That we have, that Black culture is more like a tiered system, that we have Black people who grew up in the inner city, who have more of a hood essence. We have Black people who grew up bohemian, who grew up in the suburbs, and have more of a bohemian essence. And then we have other categories of Black people who kind of grew up alternative, the cosplayers and the Afro punk community, for example. So you would say that each person has their own individuated personality and character based off of where they grew up and how they understand themselves, and how they self-actualize. Now, in defense of Black culture, there is Kwanzaa. We do have Kwanzaa, but
I
it's
think what annoys me about this is that so basically what would solidify us with for having a culture is time. Is what I'm hearing, because the only way that those other people are able to have that culture is because not everybody in Africa has the same culture. Not everybody in the Hispanic community has the same culture. Yes, they may be aware of other cultures and what they do, but they do not share the same culture, right? Not every African is the same. Not every Hispanic is the same, right? Not every Asian is the same, right? They have their own culture. And so I think what is annoying to me is that what I understand what he's saying, but I guess it feels kind of frustrating as a Black American, because the reason I wasn't responding is because I was just taking it all in, is because it seems to me that blackness, Black American identity, Black American culture will not be respected because of time, because we're a young country, and because we did not have enough time to be able to solidify our stuff. And that's very frustrating, because how will we have the same amount of time as someone who is Asian? How will we have the same amount of time as someone who is Hispanic? How will we have the same amount of time as somebody who's African, who came to the United States of America? And how the hell will we have the same amount of time as the indigenous people, even though they were the first ones technically to get God in terms of Western civilization, technically, right? Well, it's, but technically, yes, they were the first ones to get God. They still have, culture that has been solidified since the beginning. So it's very frustrating to be from a whole different group of people, and you literally got taken away from that group of people. You were sold actually by other Africans two white people because they just didn't like each other like that. And that's something that Africans were going to have to deal with, because as a black American, I'm not going to sit there and take accountability for something that technically your people did, right? And so I'm having to sit here and reframe every single aspect of my culture, and having to sit there and solidify my culture, and to bring in generations and generations, and for us to huddle together and to quickly try to come together to build a culture just so that can be solidified. And that kind of is frustrating also, because I feel like that's also the reason why black Americans also have this mindset of, you can't be an individual, right? You can't just be somebody who is individually yourself. You are somebody that represents everybody else, because you cannot be somebody who doesn't represent the whole entire village when the village has to stick together, right? Have to work in numbers, right? And a lot of how we identify our culture is by our blackness, and our blackness is shared upon the grievances and the different accomplishments that have happened despite dealing with white supremacy and dealing with that unique type of history. But if anything, I'm not trying to start the diaspora wars, but if anything, specifically with Africans, it's really freaking annoying that they don't see it as culture, considering that they know so much about what it means to be black American, that the only reason they do not see it as culture is simply due to the fact that we didn't have enough time to solidify it, knowing what we are up against in terms of having to make the culture to begin with. So that's why I get so annoyed with Pan-Africanists. One, because I saw somebody else on YouTube, they were talking about it, where different influencers, where they were like, a good amount of these Pan-Africanists didn't even go to Africa. They like to talk a whole bunch of stuff. If you're going to be a Pan-Africanist, then you have to be in the United States and other parts of the area with other black people, and then be in, Africa. If you're going to be a Pan-Africanist, then be in Africa, right? Or visit Africa, or have connections in Africa, right? But anyway, that's why I don't like the whole Pan-Africanist thing, because they like to put so much of devalue on black Americans. They like to put so much devalue, or say that we lack value simply due to the fact that we were ripped away from our African identity. And then you have a whole bunch of Africans sitting there mocking black Americans because, like he said, it is cultural artifacts, right? And so we do not have that particular type of history. But I have to create an argument on that, because Jamaicans, what I found out is Jamaicans have just as young of a country, or just as young of a civilization as we do. They have just as young of a culture as we do. Yet you don't see them having to deal with the same type of subjugation. You don't see them having to deal with the same kind of critique and ridicule of the authentication of their culture, simply due to the fact that most of the people within the place that they lived in was like them. Most of the people that occupy their space are people of the same culture. So it's easier for them to solidify their culture, simply due to the fact that most of the people on the islands and most of the people in the other parts of the islands were people who shared their culture. How the heck are we going to do that as black Americans if we were spread out and we had to deal with several various different aspects of slavery, and various different aspects of Jim Crow, and various different aspects of so many different? How the hell are we going to all sit there and somehow come together in that way to solidify our culture so it would be worthy enough to be a culture? Do you see how stupid it is? Do you guys see how stupid and dumb it is in the grand scheme of things to sit there and have this conversation to begin with, or to sit there and even try to argue about this with anybody? Because at the end of the day, that's not fair to sit there and say, and I know the world's not fair, but that's not fair to sit there and try to put the same parameters of people that were allowed and had the ability to stay in their own fucking country to solidify their culture, to tell a whole group of people that was taken away from their supposed country and home of origin 100 years ago, that they need to somehow find a way to solidify their culture the same way as I do. How the fuck are we going to do that? And then you want us to go all the way back to Africa and deal with people who do not see us as African, because, again, we are American. We grew up in the West. But then at the same time, if we don't say we're African, we're just being silly because we're really African. Like, it doesn't make sense. I can't sit there and discuss the Hispanics and the Asians. I don't know what they got going on, and truly, I don't give a fuck, right? Yes, I talked about the anime thing. Yes, sometimes I dibble and dabble, but in this particular type of conversation, when it comes to culture, I don't care, right? I know they have culture. I know they got their own thing going on. I don't know. But when it comes to this, I have a bone to pick specifically with Africans, because I've seen this time and time again, not only on the interwebs, but also in real life, where they like to debate upon the authenticity, oh my God, the authenticity of black American culture, simply due to the fact that we did not have time. We're still a young country. That's some bullshit. I'm sorry. That is some bullshit. That is so fucking annoying. That's crazy. Like the more I think about it, the more I think about it, and you have to really, really understand, because I know a lot of people don't understand. You have to understand the complexities of what it means to be a Black American, what it means to be an African American. A Black American had to create African American. They did not give us African. They did not come over here and say we was African. Maybe you had some people who were African, yes, throughout history, who did sit there during notable times and say, come back to Africa. Yes, maybe that was a thing. But apparently it wasn't successful. We had somebody who decided to create African American, Jesse Jackson, back in the 1980s. He decided to create that, and that was a whole thing. But at the end of the fucking day, for what? If you already have to deal with the complexities of having to build your own culture, having to build your own structure, having to build with creating something that is real to so many different types of people, but also to yourself, dealing with the ups and downs of confidence, narcissism, but also low self-esteem and feeling like you lack self-worth, dealing with white supremacy and having the same people who fucked you over, who brought your ass here, right? Who took your ass here, and having some of the same people be, the majority supposedly of that country, having to navigate that, and then you have somebody who, out of their own autonomy, took their asses from parts of Africa, brought their ass here, and then has the audacity to debate about the authenticity of our culture? Excuse me? Am I getting that right? Am I getting that right? I don't know. No. Like, I'm sorry. Sometimes I be trying to be on my Pan Africanist, but the more I think about it, the more it just makes me upset. You see me upset, you see me angry, you know what's going on, right? Because I just think the audacity. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, when it comes to Black Americans, if it's xenophobia, if it's other stuff, sometimes I be trying to hold it in. I'll be like, Alex, you have to understand. Other times I'm like, girl, I don't give a fuck. I don't care. They called you African booty scratcher in middle school, baby. They call me every name in the book too, baby. Join the fucking club. I don't care. Get out of this country. But anyway, let's move on.
Today, we don't really hear much talk about Kwanzaa because the hip hop community is the dominant culture. Like the hip hop community is the face of Black culture, and they don't really talk about Kwanzaa.
And see, that's also, oh my god. Okay, I'm trying to finish the video, but it's so frustrating because I'm just like, there's no way to navigate. Like, I can't stress enough. There's no way to navigate that in a way that's going to be a smooth ride. How are you going to find a way to create a culture? Like, it's like, that's why we have to gatekeep, because we are literally people spread out in a country that has a history of racism and white supremacy, not colonization. No, it's not the same. And so when we go around and we exist, let me tone it down. When we exist in this society, it's like, I don't know. I sometimes, even with Black Americans, it's like I get it. I argue with it. We need to expand, but I also understand why maybe we feel the need to only highlight this or highlight something that's the most popular when it comes to Black media, because it's like you just trying to solidify something within your culture, because it's just difficult to keep up with stuff seemingly, because you're also having to navigate so many other things of what it means to be Black in a country that is not predominantly replicating your culture. But it does replicate your culture. That's also the other fucked up thing. It does replicate your culture. It is influential, but you don't get to claim it. That's the craziest shit I ever heard in my life.
So going back to the question that I asked at the beginning is, what is the cultural adhesive that then will unite everyone within the collective? And because that there isn't anything definitive that we can ultimately say unites all Black people, other than the shared experience of being American, people would say that we don't have culture, that there is no cultural construct. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think that is at least more room for us to be creative in how we understand ourselves as people. For example, we are Mukimne. And we get to then create our own identity of how we understand ourselves and how we self actualize, creating an individuated character of who we are as people.
No, it's important to have your own identity. Everybody has their own culture, everybody has their own group, and everybody has the ability to be within that group. That is something that's very specific to culture. And I think what's happening, that's why I said, tick tock, time is ticking. The clock is clocking. And that's why this Black American movement is steadily going. And honestly, I don't know if it's ever gonna stop. I think the Black American movement is going to keep going simply due to the fact that it's like you're not going to say I don't have a culture. You're not going to say I don't have a very specific way of identifying in this particular society. You're not going to sit there and play back and forth with me being African but not African, but yes you are, but actually you're American, but you're really African. Da, da, da. We're not going to keep having these debates. At the end of the day, I'm just going to be Black American. At the end of the day, I am a Black person in America. At the end of the day, yes, my family came from Africa long, long ago, but it's over. At the end of the day, I have a very specific type of identity, and my family has an entire identity and a lineage that is in America as Black Americans, not just Americans. No. Because if we say we're just Americans, that is erasure. That only works for white people. And now this thing that's starting. I don't know if it's gonna stick because a lot of people just say stuff on social media. European Americans. You're just a European American, right? They're just European because they're actually from Europe. Because why everybody else got to have an abbreviation and they just American? Why do they have to be a default? White supremacy. At the end of the day, though, I'd rather just sit there and say I'm a Black American because I don't have time to sit there and say I'm just an American because no, not every American is the same. Because if we really stuck by that, then that's erasing Japanese Americans, that's erasing Chinese Americans, that's erasing Hawaiian Americans, Indigenous Americans. No, they should really be American. That's just erasing, Italian Americans. That's just erasing Polish Americans, Nigerian Americans, Jamaican Americans. Everybody else is not going to stick with that. Suddenly, we don't want to talk about race. But then when the whole country is built off of identifying culture by a racial classification, when you take that away, are we just going to sit there and go by ethnicity? At the end of the day, you cannot take away the racial aspect fully because that is so cemented within how we identify culture in itself in this country. So I don't understand what so many people, even other Black Americans, want to happen. They just want to get rid of that hocus pocus. Now what? You're just an American? Huh? You're just an American? It doesn't work out like that. No, it does not work out like that. You just can't be an American because then people gonna get upset. They're gonna have a hissy fit because then it's like, oh, how do I identify my culture? Because actually I'm this. No, baby, I don't want to hear about where you're from. You're just an American. I don't want to hear about your traditions. You're just an American. I don't want to hear about what I don't want to. I don't care. I know you're speaking a different. That's just a different form of American language. I don't want to hear. Suddenly, that's erasure. Because if you're just American, that is an erasure. There's different types of people within America. Isn't it the whole selling point of America, the melting pot? I've said this before. So I'm hesitant to even sit there and think that it's a good thing to sit there and say we don't have a solidified culture because we do have a culture. We do have different shared things. And yes, there's deviations. But at the end of the day, what needs to be had, what needs to be held is a bigger discussion, a really solidified discussion. It's happened before of just expanding what it means to be Black because it's already expanded, but not solely just focusing on the negativity, the negative aspects of Blackness, or just sitting there talking about hip hop and the hood culture. There's other parts of the culture that you could say is Black. It's not solely just white people, right? But then you have to sit there and deal with the tethering. You have to deal with the tethering of this whiteness interacting with the Blackness and sitting there trying to separate it. But trying to separate it is difficult because it's like, well, the only reason you're Black is because of the white, right? That's a whole thing. That's a whole thing, right? But when I think about culture, yeah, Black Americans are just going to say they're Black American. You're going to have people say, "Well, I'm African American, and I connected with my ancestors, and I see, and period. I love that. I love that Mama Odie is connecting with you. Period, as she should. She's. I hope she's reading you for filth. I hope you're getting your spiritual lashings. But for me, I'm going to stay over here, baby. Because I don't have time to sit here and try to connect with something beyond me in that way. I don't have time to sit there, maybe a summer trip, maybe drinking something, looking at a lion, thinking to myself, is my ass going to die tonight? I don't know, living on the edge, Mufasa. Maybe I'm gonna have my Lion King moment. I don't know. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm not about to give myself. I'm not about to give myself so much to this idea of validating my self worth as a black person by sitting there saying I'm African and I'm going to connect. No, I don't. I don't have time to debate because actual Africans don't have to debate the authenticity of their Africanness. So if I have to debate, I'm not an African. I shouldn't have to debate with you. That's just how I feel about it. Good day.